Hi, I'm Dan Schmitt. I do a motorcycle racing TV show, Team Chicago Challenge. My email is teamdan45@gmail.com. Our website is teamchicago.tv. Well, we're going in the past again. This show just fell in my lap the other day, and it said Bonneville Bullet. I thought about my old friend Dan Holmes, who passed away a few years ago. But I met Dan at the Millburg Speedway reunion in 2016. We struck up a conversation, and he told me about this Boltaco he had, and he was going to let me ride his Boltaco at Wasion. And he also put together a bike to race at Bonneville. Well, I've been to Bonneville one time where I unloaded my dirt bike and I rode around, and it's like being on the moon. But that's where they have the land speed record stuff. And Dan told me that he put together a Royal Enfield to go after the land speed record for a 500cc single. And that evolved into a streamliner, and it's a long story. And he put a video together, and then there's another video from this group out of Canada that had a Triumph Triton with a sidecar, and they were going for a land speed record. So he sent me these videos, and they were all disjointed and convoluted. So I decided to re-edit it for him. I drove to Indiana, I interviewed him and the guy that rode the bike, and I think I put together a pretty good show, and it's the honored Dan Holmes, an old acquaintance of mine, and I think you'll enjoy this show. If you have any interest in Bonneville and how Bonneville runs, this tells you all about. If you ever want to go to Bonneville, and I had another old friend of mine that passed away also that raced at Bonneville many times and had a good number of records. So let's check out going to Bonneville. This is a Bonneville Bullet with Dan Holmes. And don't forget my email, teamdan45@gmail.com.
Hi, I'm Dan Holmes, and this is Team Chicago Challenge. Dan Schmitt is interviewing me. We have some spectacular video from Bonneville in 2008, and he'd like to share it with you.
The Bonneville Salt Flats is the remnant of an ancient lake that covered northern Utah over 15,000 years ago. Lake Bonneville at that time was the size of Lake Michigan. Over the centuries, the water evaporated. On mountainsides, you can still see traces of the ancient shoreline etched into the rocky slopes. This salt desert is inhospitable to plants and is so flat in places you can actually see the curvature of the earth. Due to the flatness of the terrain, it has become the mecca of speed for those wanting to break speed records.
In 2001, I was campaigning a road racer with Johnny Szoldrak. A fellowman by the name of Mark Brownlee contacted me and asked me if I would consider building a Bonneville bike for him to run at the Salt Flats. In the course of discussion, he agreed to pay the entry fee, and since he had prior experience, I suggested that I bring the road racer out and that we would campaign it, and that was the beginning of our adventure. We were unsuccessful at that point, but it was a giant learning curve. I had never been anywhere in my life that was so foreign. My best description of the Bonneville Salt Flats from an initial perspective is it's sort of like being on the moon. One of the things we discovered is they have 5,000 feet elevation, and here in Indiana we are about 900 feet. First thing we had to do is go down about 4 jet sizes, and that'll cost you about 20% horsepower, and ultimately We had to pass inspection. That was another challenge, and the class that we were running in was a 500cc vintage pushrod single. Well, there had already been a record set that we didn't feel that we could contend with or compete with, so we then decided to switch to the fuel class because it had a more obtainable record. However, we were still normally aspirated running gasoline. We returned from Indiana. We'd learned a lot. We then decided that we would like to go back again. It was several years, but my tuner was Glenn Kyle. He was 4 times National Hill Climb champion. And Glenn prepared the engine, and we began building, modifying the chassis, and we took the road racer back out, and my rider at that time was Johnny Szoldrak. And we were very fortunate at that time. We were able to set 3 standing records in the AMA National event. Glenn Kyle is and has been our resident machinist, particularly after the death of my Uncle Donald. And Glenn has built race motors for his own purpose and supported and helped many, many other local competitors. In my lifetime, in 1970, my dad allowed me to start campaigning a SL100 Honda. And very shortly we discovered it was underpowered and needed some performance tuning, and Glenn was called upon, and early in my racing career he began modifying my engines on behalf of Houck Motorcycle Shop, and eventually I just developed a relationship, afforded me the luxury of consulting him when I needed advice. As an introduction to my competition, my father was Roger Houck, and our shop, which was Houck Motorcycle Shop in Goshen, we were the original Indian dealer, and my father competed and eventually became national number 40 and rode for the BSA factory. And in later years, he'd retired, of course, and when I became of age in 1970, I started competing as an amateur on a Honda 100. Eventually I worked up through the ranks and I started campaigning a CR250 Elsinore, and I was Indiana Amateur State Short Track Champion in 1974. 75 I got my professional license as a novice. I adopted the number of 140H, and I campaigned for several years, but ultimately I was of mediocre performance, but I had a tremendous learning curve and a lot of fun. I got married in 1976, and my wife and I raised 3 children. I eventually opened a Royal Enfield motorcycle dealership, but that was after about a 15-year stint as Dan's Appliance Service. In 1999 I was in Chicago at Roseland with my dad, and we were getting ready to leave the bike show, and we seen a display of British motorcycles that was down at the end of an aisle, and neither one of us could see very well, but we could tell they were British, and so we picked up our step and we went down, and I met a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mahoney, who was the U.S. Distributor, and I got the information. And at that time I went back home and I thought about it. I had a building here in Goshen on North 9th Street that I've been operating my appliance business out of, and I decided that I wanted to inquire about a franchise for Royal Enfield. I felt that it was something I could do until I was old and retired and would have a lot of fun. Our Bonneville adventure started in 2001, but as we progressed and I was very successful in 2002, Johnny and I had campaigned the road racer and we won the ARMA National Championship in the Classic 60s. So we then decided that we'd like to go back to Bonneville one more time. In 2003 I developed congestive heart failure, which put a tremendous setback in the finances and our time allotted. In the prior year, in 2002, my daughter had passed away from Ewing's soft tissue sarcoma, which is cancer. And she's not forgotten. We'll never forget her, but it's something I had to learn to live with.
I'll never be the same. Was a good old boy, don't say much. No time for women and a little out of touch with the world. Till I seen that girl. Now I've been whooping and yapping and a grinning like a crazy fool.
We're on hallowed ground that we're here in a place that that only the brave have tread and dared to go, and it gave you a sense of accomplishment in your life. It's one of those things that gives you closure to a part of a childhood dream, and for me that certainly was the case. It was an amazing experience that I'll never forget, and it's created a feeling in me that now draws me back to it, and I understand why people go back again and again and try to conquer different barriers of speed.
My trip to the Salt Flats was that first morning when we rode this thin road that heads out into the Salt Flats that ends with the sign that very similar to what's seen in the Burt Munro movie where it says Bonneville Race Track. I couldn't help thinking of the people that I knew of, Burt Munro for one, how they had driven down that small road. The thing that went through my mind was the amount of people that their last trip on a highway had been down that road, but they'd never left. Those that were killed in their attempts to break world speed records, to go where no one had been before.
My journey to Bonneville was not to break any speed records. It was a pilgrimage. It was a pilgrimage to run my Triumph Trident on the sacred ground of speed. What prompted this journey was the movie The Fastest Indian. It is the true story of Burt Munro, played by Anthony Hopkins. Burt Munro traveled to Bonneville from New Zealand in the mid-1960s, bringing his modified Indian Scout motorcycle. He broke a land speed record that still holds to this very day. The most touching scene in the movie is when Burt Munro finally reaches Bonneville. He looks out upon the Salt Flats as the sun is setting. He turns to Rusty with tears in his eyes and says, "This is holy ground." This was what prompted my journey to the sacred ground of speed.
In 2008, as a distributor for Cozy sidecars in the U.S., I was contacted by Kevin Dunn, who was the distributor in Canada. In the course of discussion, we'd shared with him that we were planning on going back to Bonneville. And he expressed some interest in it, and at that time he had a Triumph Triton with a sidecar that he thought that he'd like to ride at Bonneville. And I says, well, the only thing is you have to have an AMA license. And I says, I don't know what that all involves. But I says, if you decide to come down and visit us, I says, I can provide you a rider. So Johnny Szoldrak effectively volunteered to be the rider on the Triton, and that's how Gary Green and John Riley, who accompanied him, came down to visit us at Bonneville. And amazingly to us, they were professional videographers, and we were very fortunate. They did interviews and gave us permission to use their material, including Kevin Dunn's songs, which several of them have become favorites of mine.
Became a daddy, got a good job in an auto factory, but the factory closed. That's the way it goes at the other end of the gravel road. Lost my house and they took my car. My wife went home to Ma and Pa, and she took my kids. That's the way it is at the other end of the gravel road. I grew wiser though it knocked me to the ground. Grabbed my case and headed for the 4 o'clock Greyhound. heading up what lay at the other end of the gravel road.
Dan had asked me to express which classes we were running in, and our road racer qualified for what's called vintage pushrod gas. The Bonneville Salt Flats bike, which we consider to be application specific, is also vintage pushrod, but it's fuel and it's partially streamlined. We also ran the Triumph Trident with a sidecar, and that ran in a more liberal universal class called Run What You Brung. We had several opportunities to run repetitively in the Run What You Brung class, but I rode the road racer on one occasion, ran 104 mile an hour. Johnny then rode the road racer, and he also drove the sidecar for Kevin Dunn and the Green family. We were very, very fortunate in the development of these bikes, and I had a close personal family friend. He was buddies with my father. His name's Glenn Kyle, and Glenn was 4 times National Hill Climb champion. But he's an incredible, amazing tuner, and he built the engines for all of our road racer, and he built the engines for the Bonneville bikes. We also had an engineer on board. We called him our tuner. His name was Phil Myers, and he and I modified the swing arm and modified the frame. Phil then built patterns and developed our fiberglass for our streamliner. We were very fortunate to benefit from his experience and his resources. We had several members on our team that all produced and had special talents that I would recognize. My painter was Ron Hollingsworth, and he did all the artwork on our bike except for the decals. And I had another fellow by the name of Ed Dovey, who became our photographer and our video editor.
We run the road racer, and we went made a successful run going east and got back into the scrutinizing area, and we got sealed, and then an hour later we get to run going west, and we made a successful run, extremely successful, and we got a record, and that record I believe is still standing today. Going east, we went a little bit over 110, and going west we went roughly 108 something, and we have a record of 109.6.
So this is good. I just need you to sign up your stand. Yep, very good. So this qualified me to run. Now,
Tech inspection is to verify that you have legal helmet as far as Snell approved, and verify that your leathers are adequate and you have the proper protective gear. And then when you go through the scrutineering, they are evaluating any rules violations to give you an opportunity to modify your bike, and you can go through as many times as necessary. Once you're approved, then they let you sign your paperwork, and you're given your numbers, and you have permission to compete. And then when you're participating, you're going down the track. Everybody starts out going east, and that's called a qualifying run. If you're successful in exceeding an existing record or establishing one that never previously existed, then you have to report to the impound area. And then within about an hour or so, they will provide you an opportunity that you get to go to the east end of the track and go west. Many people go to Bonneville and participate, never get to go west.
In 2008, we had 2 different tanks in tech. It was scrutinizing and tech inspection. They are actually 2 different tanks. After you make your proving run, you come back and you do a quarantine, and you get nail polish on all the sealed surfaces. You can't change gas, you can't do nothing. And when you come back on your return run, you go back into the scrutinizing area, and you have to actually tear your head off for a final inspection, and the scrutinizer come and measure your bore and your stroke and make sure everything is legal. Our streamliner, you can't really, you got to judge where your start is, where the mile is, so you run up pretty soft. As you're gaining speed, you got to kind of time it so you are at maximum, absolutely maximum speed of what you're capable of till about the last quarter of a mile. Then you hit the nitrous button. That's an experience all in itself. It's incredible. You gain another 20 horsepower, and it's just fantastic. The first run we made a really successful run. It was, I believe, 120 some miles an hour, maybe a little more. And on the return run, we increased the horsepower. We went up to 20%, and it was going really, really well. And I watched the gauges, and all of a sudden the temperature gauges went really, really high. I didn't realize at the time that we were starving the engine for fuel. So I just held it till a big bang happened, and that was the end of it. And I just coasted through to the finish line, and so the record happened to be about 106 miles an hour.
Finally, despite all the obstacles, we were able to run the Triumph Trident and Cozy Sidecar. We were filled with excitement as John headed out to make the run.
I was contacted by some Canadians to run the Triumph Trident 900 with a sidecar, and we got there, and this thing was so perfectly set up. I have never experienced anything like it. And we made 3 runs. The Canadian that actually did the film footage, he was the 3rd passenger. And it was an absolute thrill to ride that Triumph. It was the best setup I have ever experienced. You can actually take your hands off the handlebar at 96 miles an hour and nothing would ever happen. It was that well set up. Incredible. It was a lot of fun. You don't whack it, you know, you just build up speed slowly till you get to the line sort of, and then you peg it, and of course you hold it pegged till you're done with the mile, and that's about all there is to that run.
In conclusion, with our 140 mile an hour qualifying pass, when we coasted through the traps with our proving run, we still ultimately logged a previously unsustained record, and it stands at 106 mile an hour. That's a disappointment, however, because we went 110 mile an hour normally aspirated with our road racer. So we have unfinished business, and we'd like to go back to Bonneville to the Salt Flats one more time.
Dan has been gone now 5 years. I'm running this show in honor of Dan Holmes. Fond memories of Dan Holmes. To contact me, and I love to hear from my audience, it's teamdan45@gmail.com. Remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing for great motorcycle racing action, Dan Schmitt Politics, to learn what makes America great, and you can always subscribe to my channel. I highly encourage you to visit the World of Motorcycle Museum. They're in Winamac, Indiana, 4 miles south of North Judson on Indiana Highway 39. We give them a call first at 574-896-3172. It's a great trip and a great collection of motorcycles. If you want to pick up your copy of the Team Chicago History Package, go to Rich's Yamaha in Lockport, Illinois. But give them a call first at 815-838-8130. Their website is richesyamaha.com. Pick up your copy of the Team Chicago History Package. If you want to learn everything there is to know about motorcycles, there's nothing like going to a swap meet. Here's a few dates coming up: Woodstock, Illinois; Morris, Illinois; Shepherdville, Kentucky; Princeton, Illinois; Springfield, Ohio. Go to walneckswap.com, walneckswap.com.